The wind cut sharp across my face as I stepped out of the car, the gray sky above Portland pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. Cold seeped through my coat, through my bones, reminding me that some things couldn't be outrun, not even the memory of Venus. A week had passed since the news. 1 week since they told me she was gone, crushed in a car accident. Her parents, distant cousins, my brothers, everyone crowded around the funeral home, faces lined with rehearsed sorrow. They murmured condolences that sounded like echoes of words learned too long ago. I nodded, murmured my thanks, all the while my mind clawing back to our last conversation. It had been tense, unresolved, a thread dangling in the air that I hadn't been able to grasp. I kept telling myself to stay present, to focus, but something in the way the air pressed around us felt wrong. The casket stood closed at the front of the room, polished and final. The funeral director asked if I wanted to see her, but I shook my head. I had to remember Venus as she was, not as a shadow beneath glass. Still, the explanation gnawed at me. They'd said the body was too damaged to view. My gut twisted. I had been given scraps of information about the crash, vague and uneven, none of it adding up. Emery, my older brother, leaned in, voice low, saying, "It's better this way." The words settled like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I glanced toward the tree line through the rear window and spotted a man in a gray suit standing just beyond the edge. When I blinked, he was gone. I tried to shrug off the unease, but the feeling lingered like smoke in a room. The eulogy droned on, each word of remembrance filtering past my consciousness. I kept my hands folded, staring at the polished oak of the casket, trying to steady myself. Then my phone buzzed. Quick, subtle. I slipped it from my pocket. An unknown number. The screen displayed a message I could hardly believe. "I'm still alive. Stay calm and trust no one." My heart slammed against my ribs. I read it again and then again, hand trembling. The room felt suddenly smaller, suffocating. I couldn't react. Too many eyes might be on me. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and scanned the faces around me. Who could this possibly be? Every familiar face now felt alien, every friendly glance suspect. Memories invaded me unbidden. Venus had been anxious in the days before her death, talking about hidden accounts, overhearing hushed conversations between Emery and her sister Nyla. Back then, I dismissed it as paranoia, but now each detail carved a line of suspicion deeper into my mind. Maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe I had trusted the wrong people all along. My stomach tightened, the nausea a mirror of my fear. I could feel the shift inside me, the old sense of security, of knowing the ground beneath my feet, crumbling. I excused myself and moved toward the restroom, needing space, needing air I could control. Inside, the harsh light reflected off the tiles and the mirror caught my gaze. Someone I didn't recognize, someone tense and wary. I pulled the phone back out, typed a single cautious reply. "If this is real, prove it." Silence followed. Only the echo of my own heartbeat filled the room, mingling with the faint drip from the sink. I splashed water onto my face, gripping the basin to anchor myself. The world outside the door carried on obliviously, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Who can I trust?" I whispered, voice low and raw, but I knew the answer. No one. Not yet. Back in the main hall, the service continued. Everyone gathered around the casket. Emery took the front, his toast smooth, almost triumphant. I noticed the shadows in his eyes as he spoke, the subtle curl of satisfaction at the end of each sentence. And then, my phone buzzed again. A gentle vibration against my thigh, almost mocking. "Check your jacket pocket." My hand slid into the inside pocket, fingers brushing something cold. A flash drive. Small, unassuming, yet suddenly heavy with promise. I held it there for a long moment, staring at it, heart hammering, mind racing. A tiny device that would, I sensed, unravel every lie that had been woven around me. A funeral that was supposed to be a goodbye had become the beginning of a reckoning. The funeral ended quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I slipped away without saying a word to my brothers or anyone else in the family, my hand tightening around the flash drive, burning a hole in my pocket. The rain had started in fits and drizzles, streaking Portland's old residential streets, and I drove in silence, letting the rhythm of the windshield wipers set the pace for my thoughts. If Venus was still alive, someone in that room had played a part in faking her death. Her voice echoed in my head, sharp and unyielding. Not everyone who smiles at you is your ally. The memory sent a shiver down my spine. I needed a place where I could think and see the contents of the drive without being watched. Somewhere quiet, hidden, where the city's secrets weren't slipping through my fingers along with the rain. I found the old 24-hour cafe we used to haunt before our marriage frayed beyond repair. The barista glanced at me, recognition in her eyes, but said nothing. Most people didn't know what to say to a man who might be grieving, yet appeared strangely detached. I settled into a corner booth, pulled out my laptop, and connected the flash drive. It was neatly organized into encrypted folders: Nyla, Emery, and Inheritance. I hesitated before opening the first file, an audio recording labeled Venus. Her voice trembled with urgency, whispering about being followed and someone watching her phone. The last words cut through the air like a knife. "If you're hearing this, they tried to shut me up. Don't let them." I sat frozen, listening to her fear, trying to reconcile the image of the woman I thought I knew with the one now speaking directly to me from a file. Questions surfaced quickly, like shards of broken glass. Neela had been asking odd financial questions. Emery had rushed the processing of Venus's will. A neighbor had reported someone lurking around the mailbox weeks before her accident. Was Venus planning her disappearance all along? My eyes flicked to the second folder marked Plan B, which seemed empty, but I knew better than to trust appearances. My phone buzzed. "They're watching. Don't open anything else in public." The number was familiar, and before I could even breathe, another message arrived. A photo of me in that very cafe, taken just minutes ago. My pulse spiked, every instinct screaming that someone was always one step ahead. I left the cafe with my composure intact, but my mind racing, heading for a small motel on the edge of town. 2 blocks away, I tossed my phone into a trash bin, ensuring any tracking would be interrupted. In the dim light of the motel room, I disconnected the laptop from the internet and made a secure backup of the flash drive. I listed everyone who had attended the funeral, trying to connect the dots, who had something to gain, who had been too calm, who had watched quietly. Emery kept surfacing in my thoughts, and I hated the idea of it, but the pattern was unmistakable. Why would my own brother orchestrate this? The drive revealed more than I expected. Documents hinted at misappropriated funds from a business Venus and Emery had invested in 5 years ago, a deal gone sour. The motive suddenly crystallized, greed wrapped in old grievances. I called Juno, a tech analyst and old friend, explaining what I found. She agreed to help, but her voice carried a warning. "If this touches estate fraud, you're dealing with serious people, people who won't hesitate." My stomach tightened, and then another message arrived. "Meet me where we first kissed," signed only with V. By 11:47 p.m., I was on the rooftop of the Old Town Library, the place of our first kiss 12 years ago. Darkness enveloped the space, silent except for the faint hum of the city below. A small envelope taped beneath the bench caught my attention. Inside was a note, her familiar handwriting chilling in its clarity. "Don't trust Nyla. She was the first to betray me." My heart raced, anticipation and dread mixing in equal measure. Footsteps approached from behind, slow and deliberate. I turned, every muscle coiled, ready to confront whoever was there, whether it would be Venus herself or someone I had once called family. I barely slept that night at the motel, tossing and turning, the rooftop note still in my mind. Nyla's name kept repeating itself, her calm precision echoing through my thoughts. I remembered the way she had comforted me months ago, offering to handle the will while masking her own intentions. Venus's words came back to me, sharp and unsettling. "Some betrayals don't come from enemies, but those who've shared your dinner table." I reached for the envelope again, feeling the weight of the small silver charm inside, the one Venus had always worn. It had been buried with her, or so I thought. Now that charm suggested something far more complicated. Someone had either dug her up, or she'd never been gone. The question gnawed at me relentlessly. Was Venus alive and hiding, or had someone gone to extraordinary lengths to convince me she was? I lay there staring at the ceiling, watching shadows stretch across the room, trying to map out the impossible possibilities. By morning, I was on the road to Nyla's neighborhood. I parked across the street, observing her house, noticing the newly installed security cameras that seemed excessive for a retired teacher. I sent Emery a casual text pretending to check in. Nyla's okay, right? You two still close? His reply was non-committal. She's been through a lot lately. Best to give her space. That night, I slipped into her backyard, the darkness swallowing me as I approached the slightly ajar garden shed. Inside, receipts littered the floor, most of them for mundane purchases, but one caught my eye. A wire transfer dated just 2 days before Venus's supposed death. Even more striking was the name attached to it, Lynette Carr, a name I didn't recognize, linked to a P.O. box in Montana. The connection gnawed at me. Carr, Venus's mother's maiden name, rarely mentioned, now appearing in a transaction tied to her vanishing act. I called Juno, my voice tight. Any trace on this P.O. box? Her reply chilled me. It was opened under a fake ID, one that matches Venus's facial geometry. My stomach dropped. She had planned this, every detail calculated. Fake names, ghost addresses, misdirection layered upon misdirection. But why leave Nyla implicated? Could she have been a co-conspirator or merely a pawn? Further inspection revealed a receipt with Emery's signature referencing a fund for crisis estate planning. The unease settled heavier in my chest. The following day, I attended a small memorial at the churchyard that Nyla had arranged. She spoke about Venus with warmth, though her eyes betrayed an unease whenever they flicked toward me. After the service, I pulled her aside. Why was money sent to Montana, and why do you still have Venus's necklace? Her expression froze, then shifted into something unreadable. You don't want to know what she was into. She wasn't who you thought. I pressed, probing about Emery's involvement in the supposed accident. She whispered, ask Emery about the accident that didn't happen. Before being swept away by a relative, the subtlety in her movement, the unspoken warning stung more than any direct answer could have. I confronted Emery the next day in his office under the pretense of needing help with paperwork. He avoided my gaze, hands shaking slightly as I laid the Montana receipt on his desk. Did you sign this? I asked plainly. He stared for a long moment before responding, voice tight. I thought she was running from someone. She said she was in danger. That's all I knew. I pushed further, asking if he had seen Venus after the supposed crash. He didn't answer, only trembled as he reached for his coffee. I didn't help her die, he said finally, but I might have helped her disappear. That night, an unknown number left a voicemail. The voice was distorted, but the message clear. Stop digging, or you'll join her. I replayed it over and over, hearing faint seagulls and waves in the background. My mind raced, connecting the sound to Rockaway Beach, a coastal town Venus had once mentioned visiting with Nyla. I packed a bag in silence, the Pacific calling, and drove west toward the sea, the weight of questions and half-truths pressing down with every mile. I arrived at Rockaway Beach just as the fog was lifting, the salty tang of the ocean sharp in my nostrils. The streets were empty, the early morning hush broken only by the waves crashing against the shore. I held the silver charm Venus had buried with her, feeling its weight and wondering what secrets it carried now. The air carried a chill, but inside, a fire of determination burned. I switched off my phone, needing silence to focus, telling myself quietly, if she's alive, this is where I'll find the missing pieces. The cottage she had once mentioned came into view, weathered and shuttered, sand blowing through its cracks like tiny fingers trying to hide what had happened inside. I pushed the door, hearing it creak and groan under years of neglect, stepping over warped floorboards and scattered newspapers. On the desk, a letter addressed to me awaited. I opened it, heart pounding. Venus's handwriting, unmistakable, filled the page. Read this before trusting anyone again. My stomach sank as I read about the misappropriation of funds Emery and Nyla implicated, and the depths of deception Venus had faced. They never cared about me, only the money, she had written. I felt a silent, bitter grief for the woman I thought I knew, tucking the letter into my pocket before stepping outside, resolute. I called Juno immediately, recounting the names in the letter, Emery, trustee, and an unknown identification linked to an offshore account. Juno's voice was tight. It's tied to Emery and Nyla. This is serious. My phone buzzed with a message from the same unknown number. Stop searching. This isn't your fight. I answered sharply. It becomes my fight when she was declared dead to profit others. Juno warned me about the hornet's nest I was stirring. I tucked the phone away, determination hardening inside me, knowing I couldn't turn back now. Driving back, I replayed every conversation, every gesture with Emery. Family is loyalty, right? I muttered under my breath, but the warmth I had once felt turned cold. His comforting hand had felt like a noose. Venus's warning echoed, "Don't let them lie their version over me." I could see now that her distrust of her own blood had been justified. I pulled up to Emery's house, claiming I was there to make amends, but beneath that, I was ready to confront the truth. As dusk settled, I knocked on his door. He opened it, a mixture of surprise and guilt flickering across his face. I held up the letter, voice steady but charged. "Why did you call her greedy after she worked for this family?" His facade cracked immediately. "I was trying to protect you." "I thought she was losing it," he admitted. I shook my head, anger rising. "Protecting me, or protecting yourself from accountability?" He stepped back, a mix of shame and confusion twisting his features. Before he could respond further, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "Check the trustee account. Everything you think you know is manipulated." I looked at Emery and saw a man who might be more than a brother. He could be an accomplice. My heart pounded, but I kept my stance firm, taking a deliberate step closer. No threat, but no retreat either. Survival here would demand strategy, patience, and the ability to outsmart those I once trusted. I slipped into my apartment just before midnight. Portland's skyline blinked back at me like a city that had moved on without me. The streets were quieter than usual, but that didn't ease the tension twisting in my chest. My front door was slightly ajar. I paused, hand on the knob, and inhaled a slow, steady breath, telling myself I wasn't imagining this. Inside, everything seemed untouched. Yet the photograph of Venus and me, our last smiling moment together, was gone from the living room shelf. The absence was sharper than any broken glass. I sank onto the couch, clutching the silver charm she had given me years ago. Its cool weight against my palm felt like the only tether to reality. Silence wrapped around me, but it was heavy, oppressive. I pulled out my journal, scribbled one line. "When silence lasts too long, you begin to fear the noise it hides." My hand lingered over the page, the words echoing a truth I wasn't ready to face. Sleep brought no relief. I was swallowed by a dream 6 months before her funeral. Venus in the kitchen, tears carving lines down her face. "They want me gone," she whispered, voice trembling. I had brushed it off as stress then, but now it pressed on me with grim precision. I remembered the pile of papers she had burned in the sink that night, documents I never cared to read. I woke sweating, gasping, the memory clinging to my skin. Searching the apartment by daylight, I found an envelope taped behind a painting, almost mocking in its secrecy. "Don't read unless I disappear." Inside were bank statements, photos of Emery with a woman I didn't know, and notes scribbled in her handwriting. "He'll blame her. Trust no one." My fingers trembled. Venus had known things. I had been blind or too trusting, and now the puzzle was shifting under me like quicksand. I arranged to meet Emery at his law firm early the next morning. My approach wasn't pleading or mourning. This time it was pointed, calculated. The receptionist hesitated, but I walked past anyway, my presence a quiet assertion. I confronted him directly, holding the photo between us. "Who's the woman in this photo?" My voice was low but steady, his eyes hardened. "Someone Venus thought was her friend." I pressed further, unwilling to accept a half-truth. Finally, he cracked, the walls behind his composure crumbling. Nyla knew. She helped cover up the financial mess. He paused as if savoring the weight of the revelation, then added, "And the car crash? It never happened. We buried a closed casket. No one ever saw the body." My stomach tightened. The ground beneath me was no longer solid. I replayed every detail of her funeral in my mind. The sealed casket, Nyla's cryptic comment about emotional closure. Rage and disbelief surged, but I held it down, a controlled storm behind calm eyes. "So where is she?" I asked Emery. He shrugged, a slow, practiced shrug. "If I knew, do you think I'd still be this calm?" The calmness itself was a threat. a silent admission of the power he wielded over truth and lies alike. Back in my car, the weight of everything hit me, not with tears, but with a spinning whirlwind of questions. Had I been too trusting? Had I missed all the warning signs? I called Juno, scanning for any trace of offshore activity tied to the supposed crash. There was a hesitation before the answer came. A ping from a small town in Arizona. Quiet, almost too small to matter. I gripped the wheel tighter, whispering to myself, no matter where this leads, I owe her the truth, or at least a chance for her to be heard. As the evening deepened, a message flashed on my dashboard screen, linked to an old account I hadn't used in months. You're getting too close. This wasn't about you. Stop before they turn on you too. The tone was familiar, the warning unmistakable. My fingers brushed the silver charm again, flicking it open. Inside, a microchip I had never known existed blinked quietly. I stared at it, heart thumping, the lines between past and present, truth and deception, blurring. The road ahead was no longer clear. I had to chase her, or what was left of her shadow, and the game had changed entirely. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a black ribbon cut only by the glare of my headlights. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the silver charm in my jacket pocket pressing cold against my chest. Its weight steadied me, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, even if the world around me had betrayed me. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Emery, the note, the lies they'd spun so carefully. Everything I thought I knew had been twisted, and suddenly courage felt less like an abstract ideal and more like a lifeline. I whispered to myself, courage is fear that has said its prayers, letting the words settle into the hollow spaces left by shock. Anger began to simmer under that fear, a slow burn that promised clarity if I could hold it long enough. The desert stretched on both sides, silent and indifferent, and yet somehow comforting, as if it knew I had no choice but to face this head-on. Memories started colliding with reality, sharp and unrelenting. I remembered the way Emery had always drawn the spotlight, the way every success I had was quietly diminished while theirs was celebrated. Venus, too, had been a part of that narrative, a partner in business, but also, I now realized, a silent conspirator in the betrayal. The words she'd whispered one afternoon echoed in my mind. Sometimes the ones you trust most stab the deepest. I could still see her face, the softness in her eyes that had belied the truths she had carried alone. Sitting at an abandoned rest stop, the air dry and heavy with the scent of dust, I felt the pain twist into something hotter, sharper. Betrayal was no longer a memory. It was fuel. Every mile driven toward Arizona made the resolve in me harder, more certain. I noticed an envelope taped to the dashboard, one I hadn't seen before. The paper was thick, official-looking, Phoenix Real Estate Trust printed boldly across the top. My signature was on it, forged in perfect imitation. My chest tightened as I scanned the document, the words leaping out. The house, Venus's legacy, transferred to Nyla. They hadn't just cheated me, they had attempted to erase me, to remove my connection to everything I had ever loved or worked for. My phone's flashlight cut through the dimness as I read the fine print, realizing the trustee status had been altered, notifications ignored, legal protocols bypassed. The depth of their planning hit me like a freight train. Shock flared first, then erupted into fury, raw and precise. I couldn't let them walk away with this. I called Juno, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. We have grounds to freeze the transfer, she said, but you'll need public proof soon. I nodded to the darkness, almost expecting someone to see my resolve. Then I'll force them into the light, I told her. My anger was no longer blind. It had transformed into tactical clarity. Every misstep they had made, every overconfidence, would be leveraged. I wasn't just reacting, I was planning, anticipating, and reclaiming. The desert seemed quieter now, almost expectant, like it was waiting for the storm I was about to bring. Alone at the rest stop, a different temptation whispered, destroy the contract, walk away, let the world keep spinning with its lies. But I couldn't. Venus's memory deserved more than silence. Truth had to prevail, even if it meant confronting every betrayal personally. I whispered to the desert, letting the words hang in the dry night air. I'm not here to preserve a legacy, but to reclaim it. There was a moral tightrope, a question of revenge versus justice, and I stood firm in the center. No shortcuts, no surrender. The path ahead demanded endurance and cunning. I slid back into the driver's seat, setting the GPS for an address tied to the trustee office. The contract was tucked securely in a folder, my hand resting firmly on it as the engine hummed to life. My phone buzzed, a text from Juno. They're ready when you are. A calm descended over me, an icy quiet that carried the weight of inevitability. The wheel felt heavier somehow, the road ahead more real than any fear or doubt. Tonight, lies would face scrutiny. Tonight, what had been stolen would be fought for. I straightened my back, gripping the wheel, every muscle in my body taut and ready. Arizona awaited, and with it, the reckoning I had been building toward every mile of this drive. I arrived at the county courthouse just as the morning light hit the marble steps, sharp and cold. My attorney fell into step beside me, papers tucked neatly under his arm, the weight of the forged contract pressing into my chest like lead. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and aged stone, and I could hear the low murmur of families settling into their seats, stiff in dark suits, their eyes flicking toward the entrance as if trying to measure my worth before I even spoke. The courtroom felt more like a cathedral than a place of justice. Pillars towering above us, silent witnesses to the betrayal that had unfolded behind closed doors. I took the stand with my shoulders squared, voice steady, though inside my blood was hot with restrained fury. My attorney laid out the evidence meticulously. Fake accident reports, altered wills, a timeline that exposed lies that had been spun for years. I watched faces shift, caught between disbelief and disbelief masked as composure, while a calm rage simmered beneath my own skin. I had come here not to plead but to confront, and the tension was electric, a prelude to the storm. The hush broke suddenly when my attorney hit play on the recording Juno had captured. Quilla's voice filled the room, hesitant at first, then sharp with the kind of admission no one ever wants to hear. I didn't want Venus to go that way. The implication was clear, unmistakable. Quilla had been complicit in faking my sister's death. Gasps erupted. A few journalists craned forward, pens poised. Emery froze, his jaw tight, while Nyla's eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. The judge paused, gavel hovering as if even he needed a moment to process the betrayal laid bare before him. The courtroom felt suspended in time, every second stretching long enough for the walls themselves to feel heavy with the truth. A mixture of vindication and sorrow washed over me. Venus's name cleared, yet the cost of this revelation was a fracture in the family I had once thought immutable. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the echo of Quilla's words, and I allowed myself the briefest moment of quiet satisfaction before reality pressed in again. After adjournment, the hallway outside the courtroom was a frenzy of flashing cameras and scribbling reporters. I confronted Emery and Nyla, stepping close enough that my presence was a challenge. Emery's lips pressed into a thin line, denial ready, but Nyla's face betrayed her, the mask of composure cracking into something raw, vulnerable. I leaned in slightly, voice low but certain. Your game's over. Nyla's answer came in a tremor, barely audible. You never asked if I was scared too. Triumph and melancholy collided inside me. I had won this battle, yet the cost of victory was a reminder that fear had governed more of our lives than love ever had. I held their gaze, letting silence stretch long enough for unspoken truths to hang in the space between us, heavy and uncomfortable. In a small, quiet room off the courtroom, my attorney laid out the next legal maneuvers, motions to overturn the will, asset freezes, the careful choreography of law intended to ensure nothing could be hidden again. I sank into the chair, fatigue pulling at my limbs, each breath heavy with the day's revelations. I pinched the silver charm in my pocket, grounding myself, reminding myself why I had fought so hard. My attorney's words were measured, a cautionary counterpoint to the exhilaration. The media would follow every move, dissect every expression. I nodded, absorbing the gravity of it all, letting purpose temper exhaustion. The room was quiet save for the shuffle of papers, a moment of pause before the next move in a game I had no choice but to win. Later, Emery appeared, his eyes red, the weight of failed facades evident in his posture. "This could tear us apart," he said, voice uneven. I met his gaze without flinching, the anger restrained but sharp. "You already helped tear it apart." He tried to twist the narrative, throwing my own supposed betrayals back at me, as if I could be made to feel guilty for seeing the truth. I stood firm, tone unwavering. "I'm not your puppet." The quiet fury coiled within me, solidifying into resolve. Every tactic he tried to employ, every word meant to manipulate, only strengthened the clarity with which I saw the battle ahead. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun, the recording that cleared Venus's name felt heavy and triumphant in my pocket. My phone buzzed. A new message, brief but sharp. "The board meeting tomorrow could erase everything you just fought for." I looked down at the charm again, then back at the building, the place where truths had been laid bare. The decision ahead was unavoidable. Every step, every choice from this moment would dictate whether the empire of lies would finally crumble or whether I would be forced to rebuild from the ruins left behind. I inhaled, steadying myself, aware that the siege within was far from over. I arrived at the courthouse just as the morning fog lifted, my hands steady around the silver charm Venus had given me years ago. Reporters jostled for position, cameras swiveling, flashes stabbing through the cool air. I kept my eyes forward, not letting the murmurs or the pointed stares shake me. My attorney leaned in, voice low but certain. "Today, their veil lifts." That was all I needed to hear. Every step toward the entrance felt heavier, but the weight was tempered by anticipation. Walking through those doors, the room itself seemed to pulse under the bright, unforgiving lights. Every gaze, every whisper, it all centered on me. I took a deep breath, feeling the surge of resolve electric through my veins. I had rehearsed nothing, yet everything I would say was already burning in my mind. The moment was mine to claim. The courtroom buzzed with a tense expectation, and then Emery stood. Smooth, confident, and unnervingly composed, he addressed the assembly with a certainty that drew gasps. "The forensic report confirms a single fatal accident," he announced, eyes flicking toward mine. My stomach sank as a wave of dread washed over me. They were trying to paint me as unhinged, rewriting the narrative before anyone could see the truth. The whispers turned to murmurs, the reporters scribbled furiously, the tension twisting in my chest. I lifted my head, measured and calm, my voice cutting through the room. "They hid the body. That isn't an accident." Silence fell like a hammer. For the first time that day, I felt the scales begin to shift. My attorney didn't hesitate. The recording, the flash drive full of evidence of will tampering, all came to light. The gallery leaned forward, the tension climbing, faces rigid with disbelief as Emery's mask faltered. He blinked, momentarily unmoored, and I seized the moment. The adrenaline surged, prickling along my nerves like electricity. Judges called for a brief recess, and outside, the press erupted, buzzing in confusion and exhilaration. My truth was out there now, undeniable. Later, at the Caldwell estate, the media event was already underway. Cameras rolled, the crowd polite but expectant. I arrived unannounced, and the energy shifted instantly. I could feel the trustees' eyes widen, the carefully curated calm on their faces faltering. I stepped forward, contract in hand, and confronted them under the bright glare of the cameras. "You built your legacy on lies," I said, voice steady but sharp. "That ends now." The murmurs spread through the audience like wildfire. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Eyes fixed on me, I declared, "I hereby initiate legal claim to the estate as Venus intended, and this..." I snapped a photo of the forged contract, holding it up for all to see. The room froze. The broadcast captured every flicker of shock, every flush of panic. Elation surged through me, a potent mix with the lingering grief that never fully faded. Cameras zoomed in, reporters scrambled to adjust to catch every detail, and I could feel the transformation taking hold. No longer a victim, no longer sidelined. I was the one controlling the narrative now. As the crowd thinned and the flashes dimmed, I retreated to a quiet room in the estate, alone with the charm and the weight of Venus's memory. I let myself sink into a moment of reflection, whispering to her as if she could hear me. "We did it. There was a subtle ache, a bittersweet reminder of all we had endured, but it was tempered by the triumph of truth finally revealed. In the quiet, I could breathe again, knowing that the tipping scales had finally settled. The morning fog hung low over the Oregon coastline, thick enough to blur the horizon, but not enough to hide the jagged cliffs I once walked with Venus. I stepped barefoot onto the sand, the cold grains clinging to my toes, holding a small battered box of her belongings. The weight of it felt heavier than I expected, not because of the contents, but because of everything the box represented: years of love, loss, and silence. I paused, letting the tide roll in and out at my feet, and whispered under my breath, "You don't know how heavy silence is until you live in it." The ache was familiar, but now it felt steadier, something I could carry without breaking. I settled onto a driftwood log, the smell of salt and cedar filling my lungs, and began the slow task of letting go. Opening the box, I found her wedding ring, a stack of handwritten notes, and a scarf that still smelled faintly like her perfume. Each item sparked a memory that cut sharp and clear: laughter on rainy mornings, arguments over trivial things, long drives with no destination. I picked up the first letter, reading aloud the words she had once written. "To whoever finds me, know I chose truth." I let the flames from a small fire I built lick the edges of the paper, curling it into ash. Then the next, and the next, each one burning brighter than the last. When the scarf finally touched the sea, floating away with the tide, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief, as if every goodbye was also a quiet awakening. Piece by piece, I was shedding her memory without discarding her entirely, honoring the life we shared while reclaiming my own. A few days later, I walked into the therapist's office, the one Venus had suggested months before. I had avoided it, resisted it, but standing there felt like finally letting someone see the raw parts I had hidden, even from myself. We talked about my patterns, how I had buried my voice under silence, avoided conflict, and carried the echo of inherited trauma through every decision. She didn't pity me, she just listened, helping me untangle years of habits that had kept me from truly living. I started volunteering at women's shelters, offering legal guidance where I could, and even reclaimed my maiden name. Small acts, but each one felt like stepping out of a shadow I hadn't realized I'd been living in for so long. One evening, back at the house, I revisited her message, the one she had left me when everything seemed impossible. "I'm still alive, stay calm, and trust no one." For years, I had read it with a mix of confusion and fear, but now I understood. Venus hadn't meant I should hide. She had meant I should survive, thrive, and find light even in the darkest times. Sitting at my desk, I wrote my own message onto a blank sheet of paper. "You gave me back myself." There was no bitterness, only understanding, a final acknowledgement that her love and her departure had shaped me into someone who could still hope. Then, a letter arrived from Emery's daughter, the young woman who had seen everything unfold. "You were never crazy. Thank you," she wrote. It was a small note, but it hit me like a wave, washing away lingering guilt I hadn't realized I carried. With clarity and a sense of purpose, I accepted a legal fellowship offer in Vermont, ready to start over, not by erasing the past, but by moving through it. I packed my belongings slowly, savoring the last few days in the house that had held so many memories, telling myself repeatedly, starting again doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with purpose. On my final morning, I hiked up the cliffside where Venus had once said, "If I die first, plant something that grows strong." I dug a small hole and planted a young tree, burying a charm beneath its roots. The soil felt cool and forgiving as I pressed it down, letting the earth hold her memory for me. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind and the surf, and whispered into the vast expanse, "Sometimes the dead don't haunt us. They lead us home." The ache had softened into a quiet peace. For the first time in years, I felt the past as something I could carry without being crushed by it. The shore stretched endlessly ahead, and I knew I was ready to walk forward.